Good morning. I'm Rajesh Gopinath and I welcome one and all to the online learning platform at Department of Civil Engineering, and we shall be discussing the course on environmental protection and management, and we shall be discussing today's lesson with respect to environmental audits. If you recollect, in last class we had spoken about Basel Convention. Let's move further to slide 5. So slide 5 basically discusses how I will be undertaking today's lecture. I shall basically be defining it and then further I'll explain the need for environmental audits. I shall list the principles, the underlying principles, the different types and classifications before I summarize it, and finally I shall be listing the references for your kind perusal. Let's move on to slide 6. So basically, what is an audit? Audit is a systematic documentation process. And what do you do in this? You try to obtain evidence and do an objective evaluation for determining compliances. So in other words, if you have a certain criteria and you're trying to understand how well the criteria has been met, you do it by obtaining evidence in a systematic manner, in a manner which involves documentation and the evaluation of it, which is an objective aspect. So as the slide says, it's a systematic documentation process for obtaining evidence and its objective evaluation for assessment of compliance for the framed criteria. So why do you do this? We do audits so that we can always improvise or look at opportunities to improvise. We can also be aware of the best practices and apply it. Meanwhile, we can also implement corrective and preventive measures. All said and done, there are certain core principles that any audit process or auditor should engage in, that is primarily ethics. Any audit carried out must be ethical, without any bias, without any partiality. It should be independently carried out and in an objective manner. Let's go on to slide 7, wherein now we are focusing with respect to environmental audits itself. So now that you know basically what an audit is, let's try to correlate it or connect it with the environment. So what would an environmental audit be? Again, playing with the similar words. If your criteria is to understand status quo of environmental quality, then environmental audit is by default a systematic documentation process of obtaining evidence and evaluating objectively the proofs towards finding out compliance for a status quo of an environmental quality aspect. It could be air, water, noise, waste management, etc. Okay? So basically it helps to understand if certain predefined goals or criteria that have been established by a body such as Ministry of Environment and Forest or Pollution Control Board has been met or not. Let's look further for simple examples. Let us say you, in simple words, okay, if you have your electricity bills and then looking at the amount that your bills have been generated for, if you try to incorporate certain measures, say solar energy plants or solar cooker or solar heater or what may be, and then again if you compare the next month bills, is there a decline in the bill? Is the measure really helping you? This is as simple as an example which I can provide you with. Okay? Similar examples can also be seen on the screen 7 with respect to generation of wastewater and the water conservational practices. For instance, the amount of wastewater which has been generated, okay, will be reduced if you have conservational practices. And to understand whether conservational practices are effective, you need to again look at how much wastewater is being generated. Okay. Now, moving further on, let's look at the classification for environmental audits. Generally speaking, whether it's an audit or an environmental audit, there are two operations or forces in play. One are those operations which are internal to an organization. It could be the administrative wing, manufacturing wing. The other would be the external factors. It could be the market, the demand, the customers, and so forth. So based on this, the audit also can be of two dimensions, internal audit and the external audit. Internal audit helps you to understand how well you are performing with your own resources and what are the gaps existing in your own place. External audit helps you to understand what are the external forces which are influencing your profit, your process, your procedures, your performance. So that finally, based on the audit results, we can understand how to improve the performance of a company in terms of the objective. Objective in scope of this presentation will be the environmental quality. Okay. Now, for instance, let's say that within your own factory, there is a machine which is very old and requires frequent lubrication and maintenance. So, your internal audit would suggest replace it with a better technology, because if your machine constantly requires frequent lubrication, it would lead to issues such as oil leakages, more generation of wastewater, and so forth. In a similar manner, if you are looking at an external audit, if let's say that one of the external aspects which is influencing your performance is the market demand. When we get to know what is that the public demands for, what is that the public is inclined towards to, that also will help us to ensure that those demands are met in the most sustainable manner. Let us say that one of the market demands or the public demands or the societal demand, basically irrespective of whatever nomenclature I give, let us say these are external forces. If one of the external forces in play is the climate change, obviously climate change has altered, changed a lot, evolved a lot from the last 100 years. So whatever machineries you have been using in the last 100 years cannot be used in this era. Obviously, then you need to undertake new changes, because there is something outside your factory which is influencing you. And if you continue to go with that, you might be laid back. Let's now move on to what are the different types of environmental audits. There are 4 types and much more. Within the scope of this presentation, we shall discuss compliance audit, due diligence audit, waste audit, and most importantly, environmental management system audits. Let's move on to slide 8. Let's understand what's a compliance audit. In simple words, this kind of audit is to check whether there is a compliance existing based on certain criteria, rules, policies, regulations which has been framed by the parliament or legislation, and these are compared with regulations with the type of industry, with the benchmark that has been set by the environment. Certain norms of the highest authority, let us say EPA for United States, or BIS for India, or MOEF for India once again. Okay. Compliance is to understand whether you are performing as well as the standards, as the benchmark which has been established by the company policy itself. Compliance is to check whether whatever pollution is taking place is within the law as per biomedical waste or hazardous waste or municipal solid waste and so forth. In the context of environmental management system, compliance audit is with respect to section 8 clause 8.2.2 of ISO 9001-2008, and when it comes to ISO 14001, it is again section 8 clause 4.5.4. So what does this audit do? It helps you to determine any potential incidents or contaminations that might happen and lead to a disaster. It also might help you to check whether there is any gap in the manpower, whether there is any gap in the target and actual target which has been achieved. It will also help you to understand if there is a gap in the infrastructure or, for that matter, the company norms itself. Now let us move on to the next slide, slide 9, to understand due diligence audits. Now, if I have to give you a very simple example or explanation before I proceed further, let's look at a scenario wherein there is a market near your area wherein they sell mangoes. Okay, so you go to a mango vendor, you go and inquire with him how the mangoes are, okay, and then you check them and then you buy. So you are being very careful when you make a purchase of a mango from a seller. Okay, this intensity of carefulness, this attitude, this aspect is called as diligence. I will repeat. You went, you inquired from the seller if the mango is good, safe, clean, hygienic, and then after checking this, you make a purchase. You are being diligent. You are being careful. But then what is due diligence? Due diligence is wherein you inquire much beforehand about the seller and the mangoes that he is selling from some other party, from some other sources, and then you go and make the purchases. I hope you have understood. Let me rephrase it. Diligence is being cautious. Diligence is being careful. Then what is due diligence? Due diligence is being prepared for being careful. Due diligence is preparedness for carefulness. With this simple understanding, due diligence audit is a very simple audit of a potential investment. Basically, due diligence audit is usually carried out for financial records. It is to understand before a company enters into agreement with another company, before you tend to go into a deal, whether it is worth it, whether it is profitable, or will it lead to a loss. The same concept can be applied also with respect to environmental aspects, also with respect to environmental audits. If you remember the varying principles of environmental management, one such principle speaks about the precautionary principle. You can connect that principle with this. However, unlike a statutory audit, there is no defined law or guideline or process by which a due diligence is conducted. It is usually by experience, practice, requirement, and the scenario or situation. Now, you can carry out this process in two ways. It can be a formal process or it can be an informal process. Now, formal process is wherein you review, analyze the data in the form of documentation. Okay, and then you understand whether there is any clarity with respect to the target being met or the gap in the target and the achieved target. Informal process, on the other hand, is where you get the information regarding the target or the proposed objectives or achievable targets through informal interactions or discussions. Moving further, now we can re-understand this concept in a different angle. If due diligence is used in financial auditing and is very useful in protecting a company from going bankrupt, from making the right kind of deals, then due diligence can also be incepted into environmental audits, and therefore in this aspect environment also can be protected before any potential threat, damage, disaster can happen. Therefore, due diligence will protect natural resources. It will help you to avoid getting into tangles, legal tangles, penalty and other pernicious measures for non-compliance with laws, regulations. Due diligence will help you to get permits and certifications. Due diligence will therefore reduce your remediation cost. Having understood this, my dear friends, let's proceed to the next slide. Slide 10, waste audit. So, what exactly is a waste audit? Waste audit is basically a methodically thought out process, a procedure which helps you to understand, determine the quantity and quality of hazardous waste or any waste for that matter which has been produced by your enterprise. Okay, and this is achieved by integrating compliance audit, performance audit and financial audit. So what are the objectives of a waste audit? First, to understand, to determine the type of waste, the quantity of waste, the amount of waste which is being generated by your industry. Second, to determine how effective your current waste management strategy is. Third, to constantly improvise by identifying areas where your waste management reduction practices are actually occurring. In other words, how much of waste are you producing and what type of waste are you producing? This helps you to understand what kind of treatment you need to provide. Second, what is that practice you have currently in your organization to manage the waste? How good is that? How can we improvise upon its effectiveness? And finally, whatever practices, strategies you have to reduce the waste, how can we go about improvising it? Now let's look at the steps in waste audit. Before you actually start a waste audit, it is most important that you train your members for safety. You train your members to make them understand how to handle waste materials. Once all the necessary safety precautions have been taken into account, only then you and your team can actually begin the audit. In simple words, OSHA must be in place. Occupation health and safety aspect must be in the right place. Having done that, the first step in your audit is to plan it well. When you properly plan your audit, you can avoid a large number of issues. If everybody who is participating in the audit is aware of the objectives, the problems will be minimal. Secondly, you should define, restrict and clearly determine what the study area is. Thirdly, the waste material needs to be collected. That is, collecting the waste material only from the designated study area. And please remember, this should be done with care, caution, and anybody who is indulging in this must be given specific, clear instructions of how to carry it. Now, the next step, that is sorting of waste. After the waste has been collected, your team must achieve sorting, because sorting helps you to be prepared for analysis. The waste comes in different categories. For example, plastic, glass, or further categorization may be biomedical, hazardous, sharps, and so forth. If your waste has been properly sorted, it is very easy to carry out the fifth step, which is analysis. Eventually, it is the analysis which gives the quantitative and qualitative picture of how much waste is being generated, how effectively your waste management practices is happening. So, what is the whole idea behind doing a waste audit. If you recollect the objectives, the basic objective or all those three objectives will be converging to one singular objective, which is waste minimization with planning. So what could be the goals of this? As simple as reducing the quantity of the waste you have generated to ensure that the byproducts that has been produced are as least as possible. Optimally use all the natural resources such as water, energy and raw materials. Ensure that there is zero entry of waste from your industry into the environment. As much as possible, only go for clean development mechanisms, clean technology productions. Ensure complete proper utilization of resources and no wastages. Ensure that you are indulging in cost savings when it comes to storage, treatment and disposal with effective recycling reuse strategies. Reduce the strength, that is concentration. Reduce the volume, that is quantity of any kind of waste you produce. Let's move on to slide 12. Waste minimization and planning. So as slide 12 shows, to achieve effective waste minimization, the three possible strategies are, first of all, reducing the waste which is being produced at the source itself. That could be by good housekeeping, very good maintenance aspects, by modifying your processes, by substituting your raw materials, by altering the products. Further, by reusing the waste, recycling them, indulging in recovery, and finally, treating all the waste before it is let into the environment. Let's go on to slide 13. The most important topic, EMS audits. Let us have a brief understanding of what EMS audit deals with. Firstly, this is not a compliance audit. This is basically for certification process. This audit will tell you whether the EMS in your organization or any enterprise for that matter is working as intended. This audit is done or can be done, can be carried out by any party involved. However, the certification process, the accreditation process can only be carried out by third-party registrars. These are those who have experience and sufficient training in EMS auditing. Self-declaration is not going to assist when it comes to EMS audits. It is only the certification which confirms that your EMS is efficient, sufficient and working based on the guidance and principles of ISO 19011-2011. Let's move on to slide 14. Slide 14 starts with the types of EMS audits. So there are two types, part 1, part 2. Part 1 is a pre-EMS audit which does not end in certification, rather it's a self-assessment or a second party assessment which tells the company where it stands in terms of the efficiency of its EMS. Part 2, on the other hand, which is carried out, as I said before, by a third party registrar, will confirm or enable certification process or otherwise. A EMS audit team will have the following components. A team leader who directs the audit team and processes. The team members who are basically auditors who work under the direction of the lead auditor. Both of these, that is the team leader and the members, comprise the entire audit team. Now, client is that entity who is requesting for the audit to be carried out. Please note, this client may himself or herself may not be the auditee. An auditee is whereas that enterprise, that entity, that operation, that shop floor or the department which is being audited. Please note that ISO 19011 is that document which provides information, guidelines, scope with respect to EMS audits. If you open the ISO 19011 document, you will find information on the auditing management systems, the various principles of auditing, how to manage your audit program, how do you go about carrying out a management system audit. All the guidelines with respect to conduction and evaluation is provided in this document. Let's move further, slide 15. Now, as you can see in slide 15, we are now summarizing the various types of environmental audits. As you know by now, compliance audit is a comprehensive review with respect to guidelines. Due diligence audit is a process of preparedness. EMS audit is an objective process to evaluate EMS of an industry. Waste audit is a thought out process that integrates compliance audit, performance audit and financial audit with respect to quantity and quality aspects of a waste. Finally, waste minimization is a process that deals with enabling effectiveness of waste audit. Slide 16 are the references that I have used for this presentation. Kindly go through this to enhance your knowledge. Tomorrow's class, that is the next class, the next lesson, we shall be delving into EMS audit, its guidelines, processes, about auditors, the qualifications. So, until then, I thank you from this online platform for being with me. This is Rajesh Gopinath. Godspeed.